Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am not only happy to be with you for another podcast episode and another author interview, but also very happy that it is Friday. Yep, the last day of July. As I mentioned last episode, I don't necessarily want to look forward to August, but I am happy to see July go away. So thank you, July. You are the home of the month of the birthdays of some of my favorite people on the planet. But other than that, you made me very, very weirdly emotional this year. And so I'm moving along. I'm moving forward past July into August. As I mentioned at the end of last episode, I have a returning author on today's podcast. That author is Laury Egan, who was on the podcast almost 2 years ago. I think it was September of 2018. I will look up the episode when we are on a break. Make sure I get you that number so that if you would like to go back and listen to it, you can. One thing I like about Laury is that she writes such different books. There's something also to be said about an author that you know what genre you're going to get, what kind of storyline you're going to get, etc., and there's comfort in that. But Laury writes books as they come to her, as characters come to her, as settings come to her. So the last book that we talked about was a mystery, but also kind of comedy in ways. The main character was a fabulous, and that's in the title of the book. Well, it was the title of the book. Fabulous was a drag queen who sang opera and who got involved in quite the mystery and bit of crime and had to solve that. It was so much fun. That book was so much fun. And now this book is not that book. Obviously, this book today that we were talking about is called The Ungodly Hour. While leading a week-long photography workshop on picturesque Mykonos, instructor Dana Fox is entranced by the brilliant light of the Greek island, as well as by the dark beauty Sybil Karabalius, a local policewoman. But her idyllic sojourn takes an ominous turn when a series of gruesome murders rock the town. Heedless of the possible dangers surrounding her, Dana continues to document the Isle in sunlit photographs, unaware of the killer edging closer, hungry for closure and the evidence she unknowingly possesses. So again, you have, that's the blurb on the back of The Ungodly Hour by Laury Egan. And again, you do have the main character embroiled in a mystery, embroiled in some dangerous situations, but it is a little darker than the last book we talked about. It's less sort of whimsical, I guess, but definitely more in that crime fiction mystery genre. Also has some romance in it, as you heard, that when she is entranced by the local policewoman, Sybil. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Cybela. Sybil. I apologize to anyone with that name. My Greek in grad school did not prepare me to pronounce that name. Well, it was ancient Greek, so probably wouldn't have helped me anyway. At any rate, you've got all of these different layers. There is the beauty of this island. If you have never been to Mykonos, which I have not, but you are feeling a travel bug or you just like to look at beautiful pictures, definitely look it up. Google Mykonos and do the image search, because it's just, the lighting is amazing. The colors are amazing. I'm sure you've seen it in movies because it really is quite the visually stunning place. And you can understand why the main character would go there to photograph it. So you've got this beautiful setting, but then you've got these dark murders happening, these dark undertones happening. You've got other elements within this. There is a group of Americans who have come to Mykonos to protest homosexuality, which, dang, people, if you're going to go somewhere gorgeous, I mean, have a vacation. Don't. Yeah. Anyway, that adds an extra layer. So there's all these different parts of the story, different parts of Dana, the main character, and it's really intriguing. And I liked the character development. I liked the story. I liked the setting. And Laury talks about her own experiences a little bit on Mykonos and why she chose that setting for this story. So let's go ahead and turn to that interview with Laury so she can tell you more about the book.
Hi, Laury. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure.
I am very happy to have you back. It's been almost 2 years since you were on the podcast before. And this time we're going to talk about your new book, The Ungodly Hour. Before we get to the book, though, if you would begin by sharing a little bit about yourself and maybe what you've been up to since you were on the podcast last.
Okay, sure. I am the author of 5 novels and a story collection, and 4 volumes of poetry. And I have 3 new books under contract, which is really amazing, to say the least. I live in New Jersey, and this particular book, which is set on Mykonos, was such a lot of fun to write. I am pretty much a full-time author, and between having to do the editing, polishing, and promotion, that certainly has kept me busy.
I bet. Yeah, that's wonderful. So, as I said, the book is called The Ungodly Hour. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yes. As I said, it's set on Mykonos, which is just, so many people want to go there or have been there that I think that this is a really great location. And in fact, I would say the location was the primary reason I started writing this novel. What it is about is a youngish photographer, Dana Fox, is teaching a workshop there. She's a photographer, and she's just really fascinated with the island, and she's sort of living there part-time in the summers for the last several years. And as she accidentally takes a photograph one morning, when she's out early, she accidentally takes a photograph of a killer leaving a location where he had just, murdered someone. This is set back in film days, so that's interesting too. And while this is going on, and she starts to realize she's in trouble because of what she has accidentally done, she meets a young policewoman, Sybil, who is really attractive, and they have a romance. So this book is really a combination of a murder mystery, and it has the romance going on at the same time. There are also religious protests that are going on in the town. A bunch of anti-gay people are parading around the promenade with signs, etc. So that is another aspect of the novel that is ongoing. So that's pretty much it. So it's this killer, and a little bit in his head too. There's a perspective not only of the 2 women, but it also by the killer, short little blurbs, but you're not sure quite exactly who it is. It doesn't reveal his identity.
Right. Like I said, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot that goes on in this book. You do have lots of different elements. So the location was partially the inspiration. What was your inspiration for the story itself?
Well, I've always fascinated because I'm also a fine arts photographer. So I was really, it was a natural for me to make the main character a photographer, and I even get to spout off some assignments while I'm at it. But I like the concept of the light and the dark that happens because Mykonos is such a bright, sunny, boisterous, cheerful island, and then I wanted to throw in just its exact opposite. The darkness of these murders that are happening in the early morning hours, but at dark. And so the main character is also falling in love. So there's that bright, sunny quality there, but then the dark side of that is that there's the danger element from the murders and the murderer. So those are really, one of the things that I was fascinated with when I decided to set this in Mykonos, to make the character a photographer, and also just to play with that contrast, light and dark.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about the main character, Dana. What about her do you think might resonate with readers?
Well, I think a lot of people would love to be a photographer teaching or being on Mykonos. And either if they're amateurs or professionals, I think that is a hook. And she also has had a really tragic life. Her parents were killed in an automobile accident in which she was present when she was fairly young. So she doesn't really have any family left except for one grandfather who was often out of the country. So there's a sort of a lonely quality to her, and so as we approach this particular novel's opening, she's really on her own and feeling, sort of sad about it. But so I think people can identify with that feeling. She's really been very career first in her response to her life so far, but she knows she needs to think about relationships and make some kind of a permanent place, with some other person. And I think that would be attractive to people.
Yeah, and even her profession tends to be a bit, lonely because she's a photographer, although she does do workshops, so she interacts with students in that way. But yeah, definitely the loneliness aspect comes through.
Two things as we go into our first break. The first is I was thinking about this loneliness aspect, and I've traveled quite a bit by myself, but never done like a whole vacation by myself. I've always either traveled to meet people or gone somewhere to visit friends, family, etc. Like I said, I've flown a lot by myself. I've traveled a lot by myself. I've driven a lot by myself. But I realized that I've never done anything like Dana, the main character, does to go somewhere amazing like Mykonos by myself. So I don't know. That just occurred to me, and I'm probably going to have to think about that a little more. Maybe I'll think about that over the break. Before we go to the break, though, as I mentioned, I would look up the episode that Laury was on previously, and that was episode 118. It was back on October 30th, 2018. So if you want to listen to that, episode 118 of 2018, episode 118, and that is interview with, of course, Laury Egan, and you can look that up and check out our conversation about that book that we spoke about. It is called Fabulous, an Opera Buffer. Buffa. Fabulous, an Opera Buffa. So let's go ahead and take our first break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about some of the research that Laury did for this book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Laury and I were talking about the main character in her new book, The Ungodly Hour. The main character's name is Dana. She is a photographer. She is doing some photography as well as a workshop on the island of Mykonos. And so let's go ahead and turn back to that interview with Laury Egan.
What kind of research did you do for the book?
Well, I forced myself to go to Mykonos 3 times. No.
Oh, no.
No, actually, I didn't. I had been there 3 times for about a week each time, beginning in 1972 when I was just out of college, and then most recent in 1999 when I was there doing photography, actually, for a potential book that I was working on. I just dropped out. What was the question again? Sorry.
That's okay. Research. What kind of research did you do?
So I took a lot of photographs, obviously, each time I was there. So I had a lot of material, visual material, in addition to what I remembered. And then I did a fair amount of research afresh, because I wanted to be sure that I had all the places correct, the maps in my head. I did sketches of the downtown of Hora, or Mykonos town as they call it. So mostly that's what I did. But because I had spent several weeks there, and I had a pretty good idea about the town, the restaurants, nightlife, that was pretty easy for me to put together.
So you've spent time there yourself. Clearly you enjoy the place enough that you wanted to set a book there. How was it writing a book set in a place that you've been, that you probably love a little bit? How did that affect or not affect writing this book?
Well, frankly, it was great fun because I got to go back in my head, which is almost like being there. It was a really nice experience, and I think, frankly, a lot of authors have that feeling whenever they go back to a place they've been or to a person that they were really either in love with or cared about. It gives us an opportunity to sort of be someplace or be with someone that either is no longer there or that you can't get to anymore. So it was a real pleasure to go back to this island in my head and to look at pictures and read up even more on the island itself for the research.
Fun. As you mentioned earlier, so this is a murder mystery. It's suspense, but then there's also some of those more difficult topics of homophobia and abuse. So what do you hope that readers might take away from the book?
Well, this is a genre book. It has some literary touches in it, so the themes are not sort of too pronounced. But I've often felt that religiosity, when taken to any extreme, can be sort of a virulent issue. And this is what pretty much is contrasted here, because you have these very carefree, happy, gay and lesbian people who are in a mecca, so to speak, to where they can be themselves. And then here you have these people coming from the Middle West, Americans who are really sort of very passionate about thinking that the gay people are horrible and sinful and all of that, and they think that they should protest. So that is one of the main little sub-themes of this book, is that I find that, particularly in this day and age when we're dealing with, the split in this country, I think this really shows also the same. It reflects that split in this particular novel. And then the killer actually is a very conflicted character. He's not a simple character. So his abuse stems from some of this conflict. And I think that is also an interesting facet of the book.
I was just thinking while you were talking that, the protesters have come from America to this beautiful island to protest, and I'm like, maybe just take a vacation and soak up the gorgeousness. Just relax a little bit. Probably not going to happen, but
No.
You said you're under contract for 3 more books, so I assume that's probably what you're working on now.
Well, no, actually, I sort of am, but yeah, I have my first book is slated for April 2021, and this is my first purely literary work that, except for some of my short stories, and it has some magical realism in it, and it's called The Swimmer, and it's about a therapist who goes to Cape Cod because she has pancreatic cancer end stage, and she wants to sort of lay out in her mind, what she wants to do with at the end and everything. So it's a dark kind of book, but it also gets into some family dynamics and other things. So that is April, and then I don't know the pub dates on the other 2. One is a young adult novel, Turnabout, which will come out from 9 Star Press, and that features 4 characters, 2 women and well, two boys, 2 girls. And then my third one will be a favorite of mine, Wave in D minor, which is about an opera composer who goes to a main house of her patron in the winter, and is supposed to write an opera about Vita Sackville West, Virginia Woolf, Violet Trefusis, and the husbands, their relationship. So I had a great deal of fun with that one, and that would be literary suspense. So those 3 for right now, but others are under consideration. So I'm writing a new one, so I'm busy.
Yeah, well, you got to be in this day and age when you're probably stuck at home a lot more than normal.
I am.
Yep. I love that you write in so many different genres. What about that appeals to you to write in different genres like that?
Well, I don't set out to write in a particular genre. I don't set out to write for a particular audience or readership. I tend to start with either a setting like The Ungodly Hour or Jenny Kidd, which is set in Venice, or a what-if problem that occurs to me, or sometimes, as with Fabulous, the comedy, a voice comes to me, which we discussed, I think, the last time I spoke with you. And once I get that voice in my head, I sort of, it's like channeling. I sort of have to follow it. So I don't really write for an audience, and as a result, I don't really start out with a genre in mind. And my work, therefore, is really, goes in a lot of different directions. Although I think there's sort of a literary bent in everything. And as I said, the newest book that's going to be coming out next year is definitely literary, which I've got 2 other projects in that category that are out under consideration. So, yeah, I really, I am a sort of weird writer. If you read one book, you wouldn't necessarily think the other one was written by the same person.
Right.
I think there's something a little wrong, but
no,
you must
have
have multiple personality disorder or something like that.
Well, at least you're an author and you can get those personalities out on paper.
Yeah, it's very therapeutic.
Yes, exactly. When you write and something inspires you to start writing, whether it's a voice or a location, do you like to try at least to kind of plot out your story, or do you just kind of let it come to you as you write?
I'm an organic writer. I tend to sort of follow the plot, the characters, whatever is sort of driving the thrust of the novel. I tend to follow it. Sometimes I have an idea where the end zone is, where I'm going to wind up, but I have no clue how I'm going to get there. At other times, I have no idea. The novel I'm working right now, I had only the flimsiest notion of what the ending would be. And the vast, huge, thousands of words in between the first 10 pages and the end have been really tough writing. I mean, I've sort of been writing just looking at my toes, just, little steps by little steps, rather than being able to see the whole picture. Other books really are different from that, and I have a pretty clear idea where I'm going. But I don't organize. I don't write little cards to myself or do flow charts or any of that stuff.
Fascinating. I'm not sure. I'm not an author, so I'm trying to picture. I don't think my style would necessarily be to be able to just follow the story. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a writer, so but I feel like I'd be more of a plotter than I would be.
Well,
so,
many authors are, and
yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a very, very much a question of personality. I tend to also, when I find a character that I'm starting out with, particularly if I don't have a voice in my head, which sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, then I have more trouble because if the character is really clear to me and is almost talking to me, so to speak, then I can sort of give the character the lead. It's sort of like letting a horse, have loose reins, and the character will often drive the forward motion. So, and then as I get to know the character better, I may have to go back and, do a little changing because it's just like meeting somebody new. As you get to know them better, you understand them better too. So it's a process of discovery for me in both the terms of the characters and the plot.
Let's go ahead and take another break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about some of Laury's other writings. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Laury Egan about her new book, The Ungodly Hour. Let's go ahead and return to that interview.
Now, you've got other books. You've got the books of poetry. Are there any writings that you would like to highlight here, or is it too hard to choose from
the favorite child?
Exactly.
Well, the book that came out just before The Ungodly Hour was originally a short story, and it's called A Bittersweet Tale, and it's set in the Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania. And this one's a very different kind of novel for me because, to begin with, it has a male character, which sometimes I have, but not always. And he's an itinerant Korean War vet. He's sort of a Nick Nolte kind of looking guy, a very sweet, gentle, but a big man. And he gets messed up in a scheme that he had no idea he was getting involved with, which is a murder. So this is a psychological suspense, but it has some pretty strong literary elements in it. Somebody described it as sort of a dark version of Bridges of Madison County. So that one just came out in December, and that's a nice little book. I'm very pleased with that one.
All right.
And that was a case of a voice coming to me again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you're not writing, let me start that over. When you're not writing this summer, what are you reading?
Well, I have pretty eclectic reading pile over by my bed. I've been reading Georgette Heyer, who was a very wry, sort of funny British mystery writer who wrote quite a few books in the 1930s and early 40s. I just finished 3 of Sylvia Brownrigg's books, 2 of which are related, Pages for You and Pages for Her. And I was totally surprised by those two titles because I felt so comfortable with them and felt really like I could have either written those two books if I was that talented, or I definitely felt very strong kinship with the characters, particularly one of them. I'm also been fooling around with Jacqueline Winspear's Maisie Dobbs series, so I'm a little on the British murder mysteries right now. I think it's escapism or something like that. But I
Yes.
tend to read mostly fiction, and occasionally I'll pick up a biography, but not that often.
I love the Maisie Dobbs series. I'm actually I went through them too fast, and now I'm stuck waiting for the next one.
You're ahead of me a little bit. I've got to catch up.
Yeah. Well, no, see, that's nice because then you don't have to wait a year or so or however long
Yeah.
between books. So let's see. So I know you have a website. So where can people find your website and any social media you might have?
Okay, my website is my name, and I use my middle initial A. So it's Laury, Laury, A, Egan, Egan, and that is, that's where I am online. And then I'm on Twitter, somewhat reluctantly, and I think that's at Egan Laury, Egan, and then Laury, Laury. Facebook also under Laury A. Egan. I'm more active on Facebook than Twitter, because I'm verbose.
You don't want that character limit.
I feel hemmed in on Twitter, and the same for Facebook messages. I hate any of the correspondence that I get that way, but it's fine for people who want to get in touch with me somehow. I am not on Instagram, but this book has an Instagram page under the Ungodly Hour. For some reason, I cannot on the desktop get into Instagram myself. But my website is pretty large and contains good descriptions of all of my books.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for that. And we have talked about a variety of different topics, but is there anything that we have not touched on that you would like to bring up at this time, whether it's about this particular book or about writing in general?
Well, the only thing I would say was we were just to sort of add a little bit more on the idea of who I write for and why I write. I really consider myself a bridge writer, not only from genre to genre, because I've written a comedy, mysteries, psychological suspense, and some literary work. But I also go between completely straight heterosexual novels like A Bittersweet Tale and my young adult novel, The Outcast Oracle, into The Ungodly Hour, which definitely has, two women who are in love with each other, and, certainly a strong gay-themed island. So I sort of go between the two, and as I say, I don't write for any particular audience, but I like to be fluid, and I like to sort of navigate between these areas, and I find it makes it little more difficult sometimes to promote these books because of the fluidity of my writing in terms of genre, but also audience. And I think that is something, that's one of the things that with Sylvia Brownrigg's book I was very impressed with on these two titles, that she was really adept at navigating, both a straight love story in the book, or two of them actually, and also the relationship between the two women that sort of bookends the two titles. So I enjoyed that, and I like that fluidity, and I like to be able to sort of, and I think that's very real. I think that's what people experience. So that's of interest to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, none of us. I mean, everything's a spectrum in the world. So
yeah.
Why confine yourself to just one thing all the time?
Yeah, I like the extra complexity that brings, and that exploration that the characters go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really, really appreciate it. Again, the book is The Ungodly Hour, and it's out now. So thank you so much, Laury.
Thank you, Sarah. It's always fun to talk to you.
I would have to agree. I do enjoy talking with Laury and just hearing the way she comes up with the stories and how vastly different her storylines can be. So, as I mentioned, this book is very different from her last book, but still great. Still has a mystery if you like mysteries, and still has a very compelling main character and an amazing setting. So thank you once again to Laury for joining me to talk about The Ungodly Hour. Thank you, as always, to you for tuning in and joining me for these fun conversations. If you are a fan of this podcast, and hopefully you are since you seem to be listening to it still, please do write us a nice review. Like I said last episode, people tend to only write reviews when something's really horrible. You know, they want to complain about the experience. Totally get that. But it's also nice to write lovely reviews that can help us out. If you could write a nice review or give us a 5-star rating, either one would be cool. You can also follow us on social media, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please leave comments. Talk about the books you're reading. Talk about if you've read any of the books whose authors I speak to on the podcast. I would love to hear from you. As always, I hope you've had a wonderful week. I hope you have some wonderful, safe weekend plans coming up. Please do remember to stay safe and, social distance, wear your mask, keep doing all that stuff. I know we've been doing it for a long time, but we still need to stay safe and stay healthy, and the craziness of 2020 continues. I hope you'll join me again on Tuesday for my next episode, when I'll be speaking with author Anne Charles about book 11 in her Deadwood series. This one's called Devil Days in Deadwood. I love alliteration. So join me for that on the next episode. In the meantime, again, have a wonderful weekend, and please stay safe, and please find some time to get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.